Welcome to the Tippie Leads podcast, stories from the University of Iowa's Tippie College of Business that will change the way you work and lead. I'm your host, Nick Westergaard. I teach at Tippie and lead our Story Lab program. Each season of Tippie Leads, we focus on a grand challenge in today's changing world of work. This season, we're looking at how you can be the CEO of your life. We've talked about building new skills and habits and saying yes to other interests in our life. But there's a flip side to that. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do as a leader is say no. But how do you do this without derailing a relationship or closing off potential opportunities? Luckily, Michele Williams is here to help. Michele is the Henry B. Tippie Research Fellow in Entrepreneurship and Associate Professor here at Tippie. Her research focuses on building relationships that drive cooperation and performance. She's also co-author of the 4 Capabilities Assessment, a 360 leadership tool used by organizations around the world. She knows that relationships are everything, which makes her the perfect person to talk to about setting and protecting boundaries. After that, we'll hear a story from Aaron Wendel, who learned an early lesson about saying no that mattered more than he realized at the time. And of course, we'll bring it all together with a final tip E just for you. Ready? Let's get started. Michele, I am so glad you said yes to this podcast interview because saying no is oh so hard. As I was prepping for this conversation, it occurred to me that so many times when I'm grumpy around the house, I can be heard to say that I've said yes too many times. Why?
That is a familiar story to so many people. I'm so happy to be here with you too, Nick.
Why is no so hard? It's 2 letters. It's a simple word, but boy, we have a lot of baggage with it.
You're absolutely right. So if you're, a lot of people who are listening to this have gone to school at Iowa, and if you know Iowa nice, it is hard to say no. We feel guilty. So guilt is one of the big drivers that keeps us from saying no. The other one is the FOMO, fear of missing out. If we say no now, will we get another opportunity? Well, especially when we're doing it at work. So it is very hard to say no. We also, a lot of people don't like conflict and negative emotions. And when you say no, you're going to disappoint someone. So you have to have that difficult conversation. And saying yes avoids the difficult conversation. You pay on the back end.
And I'm so glad you mentioned both the Midwest thing, because I was going to get to that because I feel like it's extra bad here. We do a lot of things great in the Midwest, but sometimes clarity around our communication with others isn't always quite there.
And it makes it difficult for us to keep our boundaries. We want to have maybe that work-life harmony. We want to be able to have extra time to pursue our goals. So many people nowadays have a side hustle and they're working on something else on the side and they need time and focus to keep developing that.
Well, and you talked about FOMO too. And I think, we have undergrads who are going out into the workplace, the very first opportunities, and that FOMO would kick in if they've asked me, am I going to get asked again? But I also think in our lifelong learning programs, in our MBA, that it gets back to, like you said, balance and what else we may be juggling. So many, as you said, have other things. And as we talk about kind of organizing our lives around those other things and being the CEO of our lives, how is no a strategic tool for us moving forward? I feel like when we plan or think about being the CEO, it gets additive about all these things that we should do, but deciding what we shouldn't is key too.
It's really important. And if you think of the leader in your life that you are most impressed by and you would really like to emulate, they are not saying yes to everything, right? To be a leader in general, it means you make the hard choices. It means you know what to say yes to, where our department's going to be focusing and where it's not. And it's the same in your life, because when people think about no, that not only happens at work, it happens also in our private lives, right? So community organizations, schools, all different organizations are asking for our time. And so for us to really set our goals of what we want to reach as an individual and be the CEO of that, those choices, there are some things we have to say no to. One of the things that I always think about is you have to say no to the good to be able to say yes to the great, right? We end up saying no, we end up saying yes to so many little things that we could do or someone else could do. But then when the big opportunity comes, we may have no bandwidth. And so either we'll say yes and we end up not shining and doing the job we really could have done because we're overextended, or we have to say no because there's just no way to fit that thing into our lives. So I think it's just so important. And when you think about yourself as the CEO of your life, you also can think of who are your board of directors of your life. Are there people who you can go to and say, let's talk about, should I say yes or should I say no to this? What are the pros and cons? And sometimes just bouncing it off someone else makes it clear. It's often more clear to other people what you should say no to, and it's more clear to you what they should say no to. So having that peer mentoring or board of directors can really help you stay on the right path and stay in alignment with yourself.
That's a great point, and I'm going to illustrate that with a story from the colleges. I've been working over the past few years to build out the Story Lab programming and a lot of new things.
Which is a wonderful program. I just want to get that in there.
Thank you. That was my real motive, was trolling for a compliment. But in doing that, I was reluctant, as I've already basically outed myself for, to say no to anything. And I had some other things that I was doing in other programs. And our leadership at the time gently said, "Yeah, we're going to move that off of your plate." And at first I was, "No, don't." But as you talk about your personal board of directors and how you can focus on the great, I am proof of that dynamic of what you just said, that it's easier for other people to see as well.
Exactly. And one other thing I think is reframing what no means. So sometimes we think no is no to the person, right? But when you say no, I can't do it, what the person is asking you for is a solution to the problem. They're just coming to you and saying, I have a problem. The easiest solution is if you do it, but there are other solutions to that problem, right? And so if you say, wait, that's really an interesting opportunity. Let's sit down, have a coffee, have a few minutes on Zoom and talk about it. It might turn out that there's someone else for whom that would be a huge opportunity, that would be an opportunity for them to be visible, and that you can be giving someone else the opportunity. You might be able to solve their problem in a different way. Well, I can't do it this week, but next week that would be perfect. So it's you can pass it off to someone else. You can solve their problem in a different way. You could just say, I think you could do this with some AI software, or you might have a solution that they've never thought of. So thinking of them coming to you as, you're the first thing they thought of, but you're not the only way to help them. And so a lot of times with the Midwest mindset, we want to help the person, but let's think of other ways that we might be able to help them. And then the second point is, if you say yes all the time, sometimes you're their crutch. So I'll give you a story. This was a nurse leader, and she had an employee that just couldn't get their paperwork done, all their charting. And so she would help out this employee. The employee was excellent clinically. And the employee got a promotion. But the promotion required a lot more paperwork, the very thing that was holding her back, even, at the lower level. And she ended up getting fired because she couldn't keep up with that. And the leader felt so terrible. She realized that she was instead of teaching that employee, well, how do you balance, how do you get this done, or sending her for more training, by actually taking that off her plate, she was actually setting her up for failure. And sometimes we don't realize that. We realize it with our children, right? We tell our children, well, you have to do it yourself. You have to learn how to do it. But when we're at work, we want to jump in. We want to be the best leader. We want to be supportive of our staff. And we don't always take the time to step back and evaluate, is this something they need to do? Instead of saying yes now, do I say, well, try it on your own. And then if you have problems, come back to me and we'll problem solve around where your difficulties are and what kind of training and what you need to be able to meet these task goals. And so that's one situation where people don't realize they're saying yes, they're overwhelming themselves, and they're not actually helping the other person.
So your research looks at how we build social relationships, and we've talked about this a bit too, because we're talking about leading ourselves, but others are involved. And a big hang up is not wanting to burn a bridge or damaging our professional reputation. How can we set up some of those boundaries and use no more strategically while still building positive relationships with our coworkers and others?
So that is a great question. So one, it's kind of that difficult conversation that you're having with them. But the other thing I like to think about is sometimes saying no is easier than we think. Sometimes when we think in our head no, and when we say no, it seems very harsh. But if you say, let's talk about that more. Let's cycle back to this. Just that pause before you make a decision gives you the opportunity to think about how it fits into your life. And you can say clearly, my priority right now is my sick child or my ailing parent. And I would love to do that. I'd love to help you out, but I can't do both. And I've got to right now focus on this element of our life. Or it could be you have a big project deadline, right? And you need to focus on that. So being clear on yourself of why you're saying no. Right? Because a lot of times we say no so quickly and it's just like a gut feeling, like we can't add one more thing. But if we have time, we can think about not only can we add it or not, why we can or cannot add it. And we can also think about more realistically, what are the costs of saying no? Because sometimes when we're in the moment, those are blown up in our mind. And so having an honest conversation with most people is something that it's easier to do if we take ourselves out of the moment, if we give ourselves a little time. And so I always suggest saying, I remember one time I got a call. I was just like driving and I got a call and it was a headhunter and they're like, oh, we want to talk to you about this opportunity. I was not expecting the call. I was driving, to do something important. I said, that sounds really interesting. Can we set up a time for tomorrow to talk? Right. And so setting up those additional times. And one of the things I love this story, sometimes giving yourself more time lets the other person find other options and other people. I remember people often, not only don't they say no, but they often volunteer for things, right? They look around, no one's volunteering, and then they raise their hand and it's on their plate. And so I remember getting this email. It came around and said, can someone do this? Now, it was something that was right in my wheelhouse. I could definitely do it. But I said, let me wait and respond the next morning. And when I waited overnight before I could respond, someone else said, I'd love to do it. And what I realized is because this was in my wheelhouse, I was actually taking opportunities from other people who might want to develop either that social network or that or show other people that they could take this additional responsibility. So sometimes we're feeling overburdened by something that someone else would just be dying to, have the opportunity to do, and we don't realize it because we don't pause.
So realizing it, discernment is one of the big parts of this, because like you said, we tend to answer pretty quick in this kind of inbox zero culture. Answer this, answer this, answer this. How can we use the four capabilities mindset to assess an opportunity to see if it's a distraction or if it actually fits our vision?
Oh, that's a great question. I've actually developed something called the yes audit, where people put in things they said yes to, and they put in how they felt about it. Did they regret it? Was it a great opportunity? And so that they can see visually what things are in that. I call it the heck no box. I hated it. I don't want to do it again. The, the heck yes, the heck no, the heck yes box. Oh, I definitely, if I get an opportunity to do this again, that's what I want to do. And then the things on the off diagonals, they're kind of meh. They're not too bad. They're okay. And those are the diagonals that I think people don't realize that they need to negotiate. If you either you negotiate and you can push it into push it into the absolutely no, or push it into the yes. So it's that negotiating, and sometimes that's just finding out more information. So I can give you an example. I was asked by someone at the university level, could I moderate this panel? And they said, well, it'll only take a half an hour. Now, of course, I have a half an hour. And then, but I didn't say yes. I didn't say no. I just said, can you tell me more about it? Then they went back and they said, oh, well, we're going to have an hour meeting to decide on the questions. And then we're going to have an hour meeting with the panelists to determine. And then it turned into like 3 hours. And I knew I couldn't say yes to 3 hours. So once I just learned more about it, I think that's where people often, they can't discern, because people ask you for a very small thing. You say yes, and then you find out all the little details. And you're like, if I'd known those details, I would have said no. And so part of the discernment is being able to take that pause and ask additional questions so you can figure out, and it might be, oh, I could do that after the end of the semester, or I could do it at another time. So that's kind of one of the pieces. And then this was an opportunity that I did say no to. And then they came back and they said, oh, but your college and your dean are helping support this panel. We'd really appreciate it if you could do it. So that's the strong arm. And nobody wants to not be a team player for their boss. But then what I did is I still took another moment, and I jumped on a call with the boss. And I said, they're asking me to do this. Is this important to you? And the person was like, I didn't even know we supported that. No, definitely that, that is not for us. And then I had the information. So often we make a decision based on someone else's interpretation of how important it is for us. And we never really take the time to find out more information. So sometimes it's not easy to discern just from what you've been given in the request. Sometimes you need to ask more questions of the requester, and then ask more questions of the people you think it might be important to. Because the worst case scenario is you do something for someone else because you think it's important to them. And then after you've done it and spent your time and kind of regret, you find out that no, they didn't care at all. That wasn't helpful for them, and they would have been very happy if someone else had done it. Or there's something, and when you're talking to your boss, often your boss will be the person who asks you to do something, and they're like, yes, that's great, this would be great for me. But then you have to step back and say, okay, well, you've asked me to do these 3 things this week. I can do 2 of them really well. Which 2 are your priority? And then sometimes the last thing they ask you, that just drops off the plate. They're like, oh yeah, I could get, Sue or Bob to do that. I just, you just always say yes. So you would be great at it. But yeah, I can definitely, these are the things I've asked you to do that I want you to focus on. Because one of the things people do is they spread themselves too thin, and then they don't do the quality of work they want to do. And I can give you an example from consulting. Consultants are always asked what they call add-on work, right? They're like, oh, you're doing this. Can you just add on this and add on that? And I was interviewing a consultant. He said, I said yes to everything they asked me. And then my project ended up on the critical projects list. So it was not, so everyone from my CEO to their CEO knew this project was late. And that person, then ended up being pulled off the project. So the saying yes, not only didn't the customer get what they wanted, the client, they didn't get it on time because it was impossible to do. And had they just, been able to have that honest conversation and say, no, I can do that, but I can't do it in the time frame. And I'd love to do that for you. Let's think about an additional project after we finish this main work. And those are the conversations that people don't like to have with someone who's paying them or with their boss. But those conversations mean you are more successful. So when I think about saying no, I think about it in kind of 4 buckets. So one is thinking about no in a different way. Thinking about saying no is something that can either help yourself and often help others. The second is there are things that you just absolutely have to say no to. So you need to have your absolute no. You want to be able to have different ways that you've thought of before, that you're not put on the spot, that are saying no. You know what your priorities are now, and you can say, this won't fit. I would love to do that. I remember I was asked to do a talk, and I said, I can't do it this year. I am fully booked up, but I could do it next year. And the person was like, okay. And they came back to me next year. And that's when I did the talk. So figuring out what are your absolute no's? So what are your boundaries? And then third, what are your I call them your negotiator no's. What are the things that are, they might be a great opportunity if they were different. And I can give you an example of that. This is a different talk. I was asked to give a talk, but my husband was out of town, and I had two children who were youngish. And I couldn't do it on that day. And what I said is, well, your conference is at a hotel. If you get me a hotel room for my kids, they can go and they can have room service and they can stay there. And then I can go back and forth to the conference. Even though it's a local conference, I need that hotel so that I can keep my kids close. And they're like, sure, I could do it. Like not even a blink. But a lot of times we don't ask for those things that could make that no okay. And then the last thing is just really thinking about the wisdom of no. That saying no is the wise thing to do in a lot of situations, and figuring, and kind of taking that power back yourself. This is a wise choice, and this is a powerful choice, and this is a leader's choice. It's not something that you're doing arbitrarily.
I'm Kira Ellerbrook. I am a student at Tippie and producer on the podcast, as well as a peer mentor for Story Lab. Today, because we're talking about the powerful effect of simply saying no, we've chosen Aaron Wendel's story, where Aaron recounts saying no to soccer and how it changed the rest of his high school sports career.
As I trudge through the mud, wind, and rain, I think to myself, why am I still playing soccer? I know at that point I'd played soccer my entire life, and I hadn't thought much of it. That wasn't until my sophomore year of high school. That year, I wasn't having very much fun, and I was falling behind my teammates, and the weather sucked too. Now, the weather wasn't the main reason I wasn't enjoying soccer, but it definitely didn't help. Considering spring in Iowa is pretty much winter in Iowa, but just wearing a fake mustache and glasses. On the cold side, the last game of my freshman year of football was all the way in Waukon, Iowa, the very northeast corner of the state. Now, being from Center Point, that was about a 2-hour drive, and my teammates were dreading the upcoming weather forecast. Now, our head coach, Coach McCauley, sat us all down on Monday and said, "Gentlemen, get your passports ready to beat Waukon on Monday, because we're basically playing in Canada." Bad news, that Friday night, we were basically playing in Canada because the high was a whopping 17 degrees. But as a starting middle linebacker who generally enjoyed tackling people, hyping up his teammates, and being an all-around menace on the field, the weather wasn't a problem. Now, on the opposite side of the weather spectrum, playing a doubleheader baseball game with a thick baseball jersey and baseball pants at the hottest part of the day makes for a sweaty evening. But I did what I always did. I put on my baseball cap, my sunglasses, chugged some body armor, the third one of the day, ate some sunflower seeds, and got out there to play the game that I loved. Once again, weather wasn't a problem. Now, after that cold, rainy, and muddy soccer game, I found my teammate Keaton, who was my complainer in crime. That year, Keaton and I weren't having very much fun, and we didn't play a lot on varsity. We were counting down the days till the season was over, and we couldn't wait. Now, of course, that day finally came. We said goodbye to our teammates and coaches and handed in our uniform. Though my junior soccer season was still a year away, I knew there was a big choice I had to make. Do I go out for soccer next year? Though I very quickly answered no to that question in my head, just because I made it so easily doesn't mean it wasn't an important question. That had been one of the first major choices of my life and shaped the future of my high school career and my life on. That choice led me to go out for track my junior and senior year, which allowed me to focus more on baseball and develop my skill and love there more. That led to a much more fun junior and senior season, and in my senior year, I even received first team all-conference, which is a goal I was striving for my entire high school career. Now, that decision also transferred over to my college major. I came into the University of Iowa as a pre-business accounting major, but after taking some accounting courses, I quickly changed to finance because accounting is crazy. Shout out to all the accountants in the room. You guys are killing it. But it's also affected my postgraduate career. During college, I worked at many local banks and wanted to pursue banking after college. I really enjoyed helping people and helping them manage their finances. So about 6 months ago, I started looking for jobs and applied to many local banks with many different positions. But come March, no banks wanted to hire me. Now, this initial failure actually was a good thing. It led to me looking for jobs outside my comfort zone, which allowed me to find my future employer, H&I Corporation. Now, these three examples are only a few of the examples that I've used that decision throughout my life so far, and I'm sure I will use it a lot more in the future. I hope you take away from my story is that don't be afraid to try something new, let go of something old, or shift your focus to something you're more passionate about. Thank you.
Let's go back to our guest one last time for a final tip E for you to remember in your work.
So I have said it before, but I really want to emphasize this. You have to say no to the good to be able to say yes to the great. And when you look at it that way, the no comes easier.
And that's a wrap on this episode of Tippie Leads. Big thanks to Michele Williams for reframing what it means to say no, helping us to see that it's actually a relationship building tool. And to Aaron Wendel for sharing his story about using this tool. As always, thanks to Kira Ellerbrook for producing our Student Story segment and to the Tippie Marketing Communication team for supporting the show. Next, we're switching gears and thinking like investors. Carolyn Reddick joins us to talk trade-offs, priorities, and how to apply managerial thinking to the choices that matter most. I hope you will make a wise investment of your time and tune in for this next episode. I'll see you there. This has been Tippie Leads, a podcast from the University of Iowa's Tippie College of Business. To learn more about our faculty guests, their research, and more, go to tippie.uiowa.edu/Tippie Leads. If you like this episode, share it with a friend or coworker. Or better yet, subscribe to the show on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you like to get your podcasts so you don't miss a single episode. And if you're feeling generous, consider leaving us a rating or review to help others find the show. This is Nick Westergaard signing off. On behalf of everyone at Tippie, thanks for listening, and go Hawks!